Hey guys, welcome to Star Wars Timeline. Today is Friday, and I have just finished watching the 4th episode of the Star Wars Droids, A Race to Finish. It's a show that you have personally recommended, and so far, I've been enjoying it. I have already reviewed the first 3 episodes. If this is the sort of content that you enjoy, don't forget to hit that bell button and subscribe so you guys can see all my future reviews for this show. And of course, we have Star Wars Visions coming up. I will be reviewing that as well. Now, quick spoiler alert. Before you start watching this video, I will discuss the synopsis of this episode and go over the story. If that's something you don't want to be spoiled, please move forward in this video. I will timestamp exactly in the part where I give you my impression. Now let's quickly run over the general plot just to give us a refresher where we are. So the adventure actually continues from the previous episode, and we see the gang, the group of friends, they're escaping from the From gang family. On top of the ship, R2-D2 and C-3PO are trying to effect some repairs while the ship is crash landing and it's going for this planet. It actually crash lands in this planet called Bunta Scrapyard, and we find there an old droid called Proto-Droid who is willing to help them out and situate themselves and give them a pointers where they should head next, to resolve the situation. In the meantime, the Cis From gang recruits Boba Fett. They basically want to go after our heroes and make them pay to what they have done to the gang in the previous episode. And Tig From, once again, he wants to show himself as the proper gangster and prove to his father that he's capable, and he wants the piece of the action and actually try to outdo Boba Fett. In the meantime, C-3PO recruits this old acquaintance of his, BL-17 droid, to fix the White Witch, because believe it or not, the gang has to repair their ship to participate in the race to get away from this planet, and win the cup. So what happens later on in this episode, Tig From and his henchmen, they try to meddle, and of course, once again, under the veil of night, they go and they attack the repair shop. But in the process, they actually end up destroying Boba Fett's speed racer, speed bike. We find out that BL-17 is actually a bad guy because his personality suddenly changes, and he's actually Boba Fett's droid. And what he does is he attacks the older proto-droid who also comes out, and they kind of have this sort of mini duel. And of course, C-3PO comes to the rescue, and he helps the gang. He actually dispatches of this bad droid, and he rescues C-3PO. So we see the gang escape Boba Fett, but he manages to land this thermal detonator, which of course we know Boba Fett uses in live-action films. And he plants it on the White Witch, the speed racer bike, to a point where after, I believe, like 3 or so loops, it's supposed to detonate, and of course our heroes will be harmed. And more so, now we have Thal behind the wheel, because his friend is being injured, and he's the one who has to participate in this race. We see the team win a very close race, and they actually manage to escape Boba Fett's pursuit. In the meantime, Boba Fett apprehends the whole From gang, Cis From and his son, and he says, basically, you guys damaged, you destroyed my ship, and nobody gets away from Boba Fett, so I'm actually taking you to the Jabba's palace. Our heroes are being rewarded by one of the companies which saw them their great performance and says, hey, why don't you come over and work for us? And that is where our heroes have to part with R2-D2 and C-3PO, because the crew doesn't want the droid's memories to be wiped, and they want him to stay intact. So it's something actually friends would do. Anyway, the episode ends on droids parting, and it leaves us with a cliffhanger, at least for myself. Where are they going to go next? Because I'm trying to not to see any thumbnails or read any episode title, so I actually have no clue what's going to happen. Now, as promised, let me give you guys my thoughts and impression of this episode and what I thought so far. I would say, in short, this is by far my most favorite episode. Up until this point, I took this show with a grain of salt. It's obviously for younger generations, for kids. So it's very, cheesy and very simple. It basically deconstructs the story to its very basic elements, so younger kids could digest it and have fun with it. So, I wasn't taking the show very seriously. I said, as an animator myself, maybe I can just enjoy it on the visual front and appreciate the art of it. So what were the things that I really enjoyed and made this actually a very special and my favorite episode in the show so far? First and foremost, I really enjoyed C-3PO stepping up to the challenge and, upping his game. And his role is actually expanded in this episode, and we see, he's becoming a hero of his own instead of just walking around and chastising everybody. We see he's actually helping to effect repairs to their ship when it's being damaged by the From Gang. And he's there with C-3PO in open space. He's actually trying to tinker with different instruments and stuff. That was pretty fun to watch. I was like, okay. C-3PO is actually capable. He's not all just a loud mouth. He also helps procure a new helper, BL-17 droid. He's ignorant. He doesn't know that the other droid is actually a bad guy. He's being used by Boba Fett, but it's something that he's being resourceful with. He says like, hey, look guys, I brought a helper. He's gonna help us fix the White Witch. And he also helps C-3PO in his little action sequence. It's obviously a kid's show. They're not gonna show a lot of violence here, but he pushes the BL-17 into this heap of scrap, and it just like topples on top of him. So it was pretty cool. I'm like, okay, that's nice. One of the biggest surprises for the show, and I gotta give out the shout out to Matt Wilkins. He has his awesome channel, and I briefly spoke to him during one of his live streams, and he said, oh, so Ben is watching the Droids show. Wait until he starts seeing some elements of what we later see in the prequels. And I thought to myself, what does he mean? Like, what? Okay, so this episode actually delivers it. And what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, we see a sort of a precursor to a pod race. In Phantom Menace episode 1, very similar story elements. The good guys are escaping the bad guys. Their ship is being damaged. They land on this, godforsaken planet, and they actually have to manage to find a way to get out. And the means to that is a race. I was like, okay, that's pretty interesting. That's what George Lucas, him living on the American air base in Japan and growing up with his father and his fascination with the sport cars and racing in general, it kind of shows here in this episode, which is obviously way before the prequels were ever made. And also in prequels, we saw that amazing pod race. Like, okay, pretty fun. Even the twin announcers that we briefly see in the arena, we later see as a joint, this like dual head creature announcer in Phantom Menace, the one who's like behind the mic and he's hyping everybody up in episode 1. It's like, oh my God, look at them. Because when you look at their head designs to their goggles, I'm like, this can't be a coincidence. It has to be something that George Lucas kind of like pulled from the Droids show, and he put it in Phantom Menace for some kind of visual coherence, I guess. That was really, really cool, I gotta say. And as I mentioned earlier, of course, the crash landing to a planet and finding the means to repair their ship was pretty close. What else did I really enjoy in this episode? Obviously, I couldn't not get a little spoiler when I clicked on the episode on Disney Plus. The first thing you see in the thumbnail is Boba Fett. And I thought to myself, okay, we're getting Boba Fett in a kids show. Let's see what's going to happen. How are they going to portray him? And I got to say, he was portrayed wonderfully. First of all, it's his voice acting. It's really intimidating. It's really tough. You don't question for a second that you don't want to mess with this guy. He is going to harm you. He's going to do some crazy stuff. And that's exactly what he does. He's like, puts a thermal detonator on their ship. That's a kid's show. I was like, okay. That's Boba Fett. He's well represented. He has plenty of action sequences. We actually see him flying around and using his jetpack, something we unfortunately don't get to see in the original films. And I expected that in the 80s, after people saw the original saga, and they saw that episode, it's like, oh, okay, we finally get to see Boba Fett flying around. Okay, that was also pretty cool. And I gotta say, he was really well animated. When you see him standing, in his heroic pose, and he's like, just his helmet is moving, and then his body, his torso, it is so accurate to live action. Like, once again, the artists have done a beautiful job animating and drawing him because he really feels authentic. And I think that's very important when you're going from live action to animation and back and forth. And it was fun to see that, he is part of this Hutt cartel. he either works for the Hutts or he's being hired by them. But it also builds this larger lore of Star Wars, which I also really appreciated. And it felt like Boba Fett is not just a cameo, he's a big part of this episode. That worked really well for me, and it cemented as being my favorite episode up to date. Guys, now the actual star of this episode is the actual race. I gotta say, it was pretty sweet. It was awesome. From the visual standpoint, the way that they designed this really weird tube-like racing arena, and you see all the ships flying through it, skimming, and they're going really, really fast. It was very, very tight. Once again, thanks to great cuts, great angles, and really fast ships moving around, like accompanied by really good sound effects. They just sold this race scene really, really well. I mentioned in my previous episodes, there were also other chases during the night scene, and the team is also trying to escape also in the White Witch. But this episode just took the cake. That's the best one to date, and I hope I get to see more in the show before it ends. Now let's see if I forgot to mention anything. I mentioned the racing track, and I also mentioned that it's obviously a precursor to pod racing, which also made it so much more exciting and nostalgic. You know, I wasn't the biggest fan of the prequels, but without a question, you know, the pod racing scene is one of the strongest action sequences in Star Wars in general. So that was exciting to watch. And what I also really liked was the ending, because by the end of it, we are reinforced with the idea that these droids have these memory cores, and if you erase them, they just become soulless. And it's something that the Star Wars Legends has always done, trying to make us understand as readers why they're so important to the main cast, and that they're not just automatons, you know, they're not just droids moving around aimlessly. They're dear friends to Luke Skywalker and even Han Solo, who is always grumpy, and Leia. And the show kind of like sells this charm of saying, look, they have a soul. And if you erase that, they're not going to be C-3PO and R2-D2 anymore. And it was very important for our friends to say that, like, hey, we're being hired by this company, we're moving up in life, but we don't want our droids to be memory wiped. So we have to say goodbye. We have to part ways. So it's a very kind of like quiet but important moment, teaching kids how to say goodbye to your friends. Sometimes, you know, things have to move on in life, and we are ending up with the droids floating in space within this capsule, and they are wondering what's going to happen to them next. And it also made me wonder what's going to happen to them next. I don't know if we're going to see Kia and Thal and all of the guys ever again, if we're saying goodbye to them. So I'm very excited to see where the show goes next. If I were to rate this episode, I would probably give it like a 3.5, 4 out of 4 for this particular show, obviously, for what it is. I'm judging this show on its own merit. It is obviously not Rebels. It is not The Amazing Bad Batch. You know, it has a category of its own, and I respect the fact that, you know, it's for much younger audience, not necessarily for me. But I imagine myself, if I was a kid watching the show when I was like 4 or 5 year old, I would have a blast with it, especially with this episode. Anyways, guys, this was my episode 4 review. I hope you really enjoyed it. If you would like to see my future episode reviews and all the cool content I have on the channel, please consider subscribing, hit that bell button, and I'll hit you up with some interesting videos next time. Take care.